It was a cold winter morning in West Africa. The sky above Ouagadougou thundered with the roar of jet engines. People stopped in the streets. Children pointed upward. Farmers leaned on their hoes and looked to the clouds. Something unusual was happening. Moments later, the cameras confirmed it. Russia's official presidential jet was descending onto the runway. And it was not alone. 2 MiG fighter jets flanked it in perfect formation. This was the kind of escort normally reserved for leaders of global superpowers. But the man who stepped forward to meet it was not from Moscow, not from Washington, not from Paris. He was a 35-year-old officer from Burkina Faso. His name, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. On the tarmac, soldiers froze in disbelief. A red carpet stretched forward. CNN broke into its programming. NATO officials in Brussels marked it unprecedented. And French diplomats, once confident in their control of West Africa, demanded answers. Why was Russia extending this level of respect to a young African officer? For the next 48 hours, Ibrahim Traoré vanished from the public eye. There were no press conferences, no official communiques, no televised meetings. Only grainy satellite images showing a convoy moving through snow-covered Russian roads toward restricted facilities. What was happening behind those closed doors? Was this about weapons, alliances, or something far stranger? If you believe freedom is not given but built, if you believe the future of Africa deserves to be understood with truth, not just speculation, stay with me through this story. Because what happened next may be remembered as a turning point not only for Burkina Faso, but for the very idea of independence itself. The jet touched down. The cameras flashed. Then the story went quiet. For 48 hours, there were no speeches, no press notes, no motorcades on public streets, only silence. But satellites do not sleep. Commercial trackers picked up a convoy moving through winter roads outside Moscow. It turned toward restricted research sites, not parade grounds, not armories. The route did not match a ceremony. It looked like work. It looked like study. In Ouagadougou, people gathered around small radios. In Paris, officials called for briefings. In Brussels, analysts wrote the word unusual. In Washington, one question rose above the rest. Why would Russia open doors like these for a young officer from Burkina Faso? Then a short clip leaked. The video was grainy, but the scene was clear. Inside a wide hangar stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré. No medals, no long table of generals. He wore boots and gloves. Around him stood engineers. They did not show him missiles. They showed him batteries, solar cores, heat-resistant drones built for harsh winds and dust. What did he ask? He asked about storage at night. He asked about low-cost parts that village electricians could fix. He asked about mapping soil moisture by drone so farmers could save water. He did not sound like a buyer of weapons. He sounded like a builder of communities. The clip spread across Africa news networks. In Bamako and Niamey, anchors repeated the same line. He went for tools, not toys. Older listeners nodded. They remembered the days after wars, when men came home and rebuilt towns with steady hands and simple plans. Back in Burkina Faso, the silence felt different now. It did not feel like a cover-up. It felt like a plan in motion. People asked a new question. What would he bring home? Gold? No. Oil deals? No. It sounded like he would bring something lighter than steel, cheaper than cash, and stronger than both. Knowledge. French commentators dismissed the clip at first. They said it proved nothing. But even they had to admit one fact. There was no video of tanks. No photos of rockets, no staged parade. 48 hours, and no weapon on screen. Only parts, only diagrams, only engineers pointing to whiteboards. In NATO halls, a staff note used careful words. If these systems are replicated locally, traditional leverage may be reduced. In simple language, that means something powerful. If villages can power their own lights and pump their own water, loans become less useful as chains. Sanctions become harder to use. Pressure loses bite. Why would the Kremlin do this? Some said strategy. Some said image. Some said it was about a new map for influence, one that runs on blueprints, not bases. But maybe there was another reason. Maybe Russia wanted to show it could be a partner in resilience, not just a dealer in arms. Maybe it saw in Ibrahim Traoré a student who would also become a teacher. In homes across America, older viewers watched the story with mixed feelings. They knew the Cold War. They did not trust Moscow. But they also knew something else. They knew what self-reliance looks like. They knew the GI Bill. They knew how a trade taught to one man can feed a whole town. They knew dignity when they saw it. So the 48 hours passed. The jet would fly back soon, but a seed had been planted. Not of fear, not of pride, but of purpose. What if a poor country can copy designs the way a student copies notes? What if knowledge can travel faster than debt? What if the real power is not a bomb, but a blueprint pinned to a classroom wall? If you have ever rebuilt your life after a loss, you know this truth. You do not need permission to start. You need a plan, a tool, and a neighbor to work with you. That is how towns are saved. That is how nations stand up. If this part stirs a memory in you, of family, of faith, of a time you fixed what was broken, hold it close. We will need it for what comes next. When the first official reactions came, they were careful. France said it watched the situation. The European press said it had questions. In Washington, briefings used clinical tones. But between the lines, you could hear the real concern. This was not the expected story. Many expected a defense pact, a hard alliance, a headline that fits an old frame. Russia arms Africa. Africa bends to Moscow. That headline never came. Instead, Africa news feeds showed lab corridors, not parade grounds. They showed soldering irons, not rifles. They showed a young African leader leaning over a table full of simple parts. In Brussels, a NATO note called the MiG escort symbolic and unusual. But the note spent more lines on something else. Off-grid energy modules, water harvesting designs, portable classroom frames, and drones for fields, not war. Someone in that building understood the stakes. If a design can be built in a garage, it is hard to control. If a village can keep the lights on without fuel trucks, it is hard to threaten. French officials offered a different path. Loans, labs in Lyon, partnerships. But people in Ouagadougou remembered the old terms of such offers. Years of debt, delays, consultants who never stayed to see if the pump worked in the dry season. The mood had changed. The word dependency felt like a stain people wanted to wash off. American analysts split into two camps. Some warned of influence games and urged a response with cash and conditions. Others saw a chance to do something truer to American roots. Help teach, then step back. One retired colonel said on radio, "We can compete with blueprints, not with bribes. Share open-source designs. Send teachers, not strings." Meanwhile, the streets in West Africa spoke it in their own way. A clip went viral with a simple caption, "Tools, not toys." Young men cheered, mothers smiled, old farmers nodded and said a quiet amen. They knew what it means to carry water for miles. They knew what it means to mend the same hose again and again because a new one costs too much. Then came the rumor that took on a life of its own. A plain black briefcase stepping off the Russian plane on the return to Burkina Faso. No crest, no chain lock. Security let it pass. People guessed wild things: cash, codes, contracts. The truth, when it surfaced, was stranger and simpler. Weeks later, bundles arrived at rural schools. Not money, not orders. Sheets of cloth printed with diagrams in French and Moore. Step-by-step pictures. How to build a solar light from recycled parts. How to rig a low-cost pump from scrap tubing. How to set up a mesh network when the tower dies in a storm. USB sticks with open files that any printer could copy. It was not a vault, it was a library. That is why the reaction from big capitals felt uneasy. You can seize money, you can block a ship, but you cannot erase a photocopy in 1,000 hands. You cannot sanction a chalkboard lesson. You cannot disarm a village that powers its night school with the sun. And so a simple twist. No weapons, only wisdom, shook old habits. In Paris, policy papers asked how to re-engage. In Brussels, a memo warned that decentralized systems are resilient to external pressure. In Washington, a line appeared in a quiet report: no confirmed weapons transfer. Another line, more sober: Burkina Faso's replication model may reduce U.S. leverage over 5 to 10 years. For many Americans watching at home, the question became moral, not geopolitical. Should we fear a people who want to stand on their own feet? Or should we respect it and meet it with our best? Skills, training, friendship without chains. The older generation knows this choice. After every hard season in our own land, the answer was the same. We taught, we built, we moved forward together. In churches from Detroit to Dallas, pastors preached on dignity. Teach a man to fish is not a slogan. It is a duty. Aging veterans heard the sound of that duty and sat a little straighter on the pew. This story from Burkina Faso did not feel like propaganda. It felt like memory. The world wanted a headline about fear. But the real headline was about work. Ibrahim Traoré did not ask for pity. He asked for plans. And when a leader asks for plans to serve the poor, that speaks to something older than politics: justice. If that word still means something to you, keep listening. The next part is not grand. It is small. It happens in hands, not halls. But it is the part that changes lives. Change did not start in a palace. It started in a shed. In Koudougou, a teacher unrolled a cloth chart under a mango tree. Children gathered close. The chart showed simple shapes: panels, wires, a small switch. He spoke slowly in Moore, then in French. This is how we keep the light on after sunset. The class built their first solar lamp that week. It was not pretty. It worked. In the east, a women's group met in a church hall. On the table lay tools, wires, and old batteries pulled from junk piles. A young instructor showed how to open, test, and reuse cells to power lanterns. Mothers who once walked miles for firewood learned to charge a light instead. They smiled when it glowed for the first time. They said, "Tomorrow, our daughters will read." In the north, a farmer and his son stood behind a small drone cobbled together from plastic parts. They sent it over dry fields. It mapped the soil with a cheap sensor. They marked the wet patches. They saved water. The harvest did not double, but it did not fail. That alone felt like grace. Burkina Faso is poor. Over half the people live by the land. Many villages lack stable power. In such places, a working pump is not a gadget. It is life. A lamp is not a toy. It is a doorway to study. A shaded frame that can stand against dust storms is not a fancy school. It is a promise kept. As these small wins spread, the politics shifted. Ministries were slow at first. Paperwork stacked high. But citizens moved faster. They built anyway. They shared files on cheap phones. They copied diagrams at local print shops. They taught each other. Officials faced a choice: try to control it, or bless it and get out of the way. The best of them chose to bless it. They set aside small funds to buy soldering irons, multimeters, and spare parts. They told school heads to run night classes when the lamps could be kept on. They asked radio hosts to read instructions aloud for those who could not read. This was policy made in plain language, not complex, very human. International groups took notice. Some wanted to ship equipment, as always, but locals asked for something else. Fund our libraries of tools. Pay a translator to put the manuals in our own words. Train our teachers, then leave the kits with us. A few groups listened. They saw the wisdom. They changed their plans. In Paris, the talk grew tense. The CFA franc still shaped much of West Africa's finance. Yet here was a path that worked outside the old financial lanes. A village with its own light and water was harder to pull by the purse. In Brussels, energy executives worried, quietly, that if thousands of small grids bloom, demand for the big financed projects could fall. But in the homes of Burkina Faso, the news was simpler. A girl stayed in school because she could read at night. A mother saved her back because she carried less wood. A father stayed on his farm because the well worked through the dry months. These are not headlines. They are the reasons people choose hope over despair. And what of Ibrahim Traoré? He did not claim victory on TV. He visited workshops. He stood with elders and said, "We rise so our children may rise with us." He spoke with dignity, not as a strong man, as a servant of a hard land and a stubborn people. That tone matters. It sets a rhythm a nation can follow. There were threats. There were smears. There were whispers of sabotage in new forests and cuts in new wires. But people remembered a simple thing. You cannot burn a lesson once learned. You can ruin a device. You cannot erase a skill in steady hands. If you have ever taught a grandchild to fix a hinge, you know this joy. It is quiet, but it lasts. That is what was happening, one lamp at a time, one pump at a time, across a country the world once called peripheral. If these small proofs speak to your heart, say a prayer for the hands that keep them running. The work is fragile, but it is real. Across the ocean, America watched. Some saw a game of flags. Others saw a mirror. Policy people argued on cable shows. Should we counter Moscow with money? Should we pressure Ouagadougou with rules? A few voices cut through the noise. Teach, they said. Share open designs. Invite Burkinab teachers to our ag colleges. Send our farm engineers to their fields. Let us compete by serving. Older Americans understood this instinct. It felt like the best chapters of our past. After war, we trained. After drought, we learned new ways to irrigate. After the Dust Bowl, we listened to the land and rebuilt. Self-reliance was not a slogan. It was a craft. In church basements, veterans talked it over with young volunteers. If Burkina Faso wants to stand, one said, help them stand. That is a friend's job. They did not excuse Russia. They did not forget history. They did remember this. Dignity outlasts dependency. And teaching is the shortest road to dignity. Meanwhile, Europe counted costs. If villages make power on their own, big loans lose sway. If farmers harvest more with less water, aid handouts shrink. If schools light their rooms at night, the next generation will be harder to fool. These are not threats. These are blessings. But blessings disrupt old business. In Beijing, planners watched a different angle. Burkina Faso was not rushing into their usual lanes either. It was trying a third path: open knowledge, local labor, small grids, rugged tools, hard to sell, easy to spread. That made it powerful. So the choice for Washington became clear: resist the tide and look fearful, or respect it and look faithful to our roots. Faith in work, in learning, in the worth of every child who opens a book under a simple lamp. My friend, this is not about choosing Moscow. It is about choosing a moral posture. When a poor nation asks for blueprints instead of bullets, we can answer with the best of America. If we do, we will not lose influence. We will gain honor. That word still matters. And for our viewers, many of you fathers, mothers, veterans, farmers, this is your language. This is about building, about justice you can touch, about security that starts at a wellhead and a classroom door. If you believe that, then you already know how this story should end. The Russian jet came and went. The MiGs roared and were gone. The carpets were rolled up. Life returned to dust roads, market stalls, and classrooms under tin roofs. But something stayed, a way of thinking, a way of working. Burkina Faso is still poor. The Sahel is still harsh. Terror and drought still test the will of the people. None of that changed in 48 hours. But the shape of tomorrow changed a little. Not through a treaty, through a lesson plan. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before elders and spoke in a calm voice. We do not ask permission to be free. We rise because our children must rise with us. Some will call him a hero. Some will call him a threat. Time will judge. But this much is true today. He asked the world for wisdom, not weapons. That choice deserves a fair hearing. There is a warning here. Those who profit from dependency will not bless this path. There will be smears. There may be pressure. There may be sudden storms over fields that just began to grow. Yet there is also a truth the storms cannot touch. A skill in a villager's hands, a circuit a child can wire, a pump that keeps turning when the truck does not come. To our audience in America, many of you over 60, with long memories and steady hearts, remember what your parents taught you. After war, they rebuilt. After floods, they shoveled mud together. After loss, they rose with faith and work. The tools were simple. The strength was moral. That is what we see now in Burkina Faso. Not perfection, not propaganda, just a people trying to own their future. Africa news will keep the headlines coming. Some will be harsh, some will be hopeful. But do not miss the root of this story. A blueprint can cross borders no wall can stop. A skill can set a neighbor free. A lamp can turn a boy into a reader into a builder into a father who leaves his children something better than he found. If the spirit of this story touches you, if it recalls a farm you once saved, a shop you once repaired, a home you once raised from the ground, share that memory. Speak it to your children and grandchildren. Let them hear what freedom sounds like when it is built by hand, guarded by faith, and measured in the faces of those you love. God bless the people who work with little and make much. God bless the land that yields to patient hands. And may God bless every child who opens a book under a light their family made. Do you think Ibrahim Traoré is a hope or a hazard to the old order? Or is he simply a man trying to keep promises to his people? However you answer, let it be honest, and let it be kind. The world is listening.